There are two senses in which the word capital G God or small g God can properly be used. Most modern languages generally distinguish between the two usages by writing only one of them with an uppercase first letter, as though it were a proper name, which it is not. Most of us understand that capital G God, or its equivalent, means the one God who is the source of all things, whereas small g God, or its equivalent, indicates one or another of a plurality of divine beings who inhabit the cosmos and reign over its various regions. This is not, however, merely a distinction in numbering between monotheism and polytheism, as though the issue were merely that of determining how many divine entities one happens to think there are. It is a distinction, instead, between two entirely different kinds of reality, belonging to two entirely disparate conceptual orders. In fact, the very division between monotheism and polytheism is in many cases a confusion of categories. Several of the religious cultures that we sometimes inaccurately characterize as polytheistic have traditionally insisted upon an absolute differentiation between the one transcendent Godhead from whom all being flows and the various divine beings who indwell and govern the heavens and the earth. Only the one God, says Swami Prabhavananda, speaking more or less for the whole of developed Vedantic and Bhaktic Hinduism, is the uncreated. Gods, through supernatural, belong among the creatures. Like the Christian angels, they are much nearer to man than to capital G God. Conversely, many creeds we speak correctly of as monotheistic embrace the very same distinction. The Adi Granth of the Sikhs, for instance, describes the one God as the creator of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. In truth, Prabhavananda's comparison of the gods of India to Christianity's angels is more apt than many modern Christians may realize. Late Hellenistic pagan thought often tended to draw a clear demarcation between the one transcendent God, or in Greek, ho theos, God with the definite article, and any particular local God, any mere inarticular theos, who might superintend this or that people or nation or aspect of the natural world. At the same time, late Hellenistic Jews and Christians recognized a multitude of angelic powers and principalities, some obedient to the one transcendent God, and some in rebellion, who governed the elements of nature and the peoples of the earth. To any impartial observer at the time, coming from some altogether different culture, the theological cosmos of a great deal of pagan polytheism would have seemed all but indistinguishable from that of a great deal of Jewish or Christian monotheism. To speak of God properly, then, to use the word in a sense consonant with the teachings of Orthodox Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Sikhism, Hinduism, Baha'i, and a great deal of antique paganism, and so forth, is to speak of the one infinite source of all that is, eternal, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, uncreated, uncaused, perfectly transcendent of all things, and for that very reason absolutely immanent to all things. God, so understood, is not something posed over against the universe, in addition to it, nor is he the universe itself. He is not a being, at least not in the way that a tree, a shoemaker, or a god, lowercase, is a being. He is not one more object in the inventory of things that are, or any sort of discrete object at all. Rather, all things that exist receive their being continuously from him, who is the infinite wellspring of all that is, in whom, to use the language of the Christian scriptures, all things live and move and have their being. In one sense, he is beyond being, if by being one means the totality of discrete, finite things. In another sense, he is being itself, in that he is the inexhaustible source of all reality, the absolute upon which the contingent is always utterly dependent, the unity and simplicity that underlies and sustains the diversity of finite and composite things. Infinite being, infinite consciousness, infinite bliss, from whom we are, by whom we know and are known, in whom we find our only true consummation. All the great theistic traditions agree that God, understood in this proper sense, is essentially beyond finite comprehension. Hence, much of the language used of him is negative in form, and has been reached only by a logical process of abstraction from those qualities of finite reality that make it insufficient to account for its own existence. All agree as well, however, that he can genuinely be known, that is, reasoned toward, intimately encountered, directly experienced, with a fullness surpassing mere conceptual comprehension. By contrast, when we speak of gods, lowercase, we are talking not of transcendent reality at all, but only of a higher or more powerful or more splendid dimension of immanent reality. Any gods who might be out there do not transcend nature, but belong to it. Their theogonies can be recounted, how some rose out of the primal night, how some were born of other, more titanic progenitors, how others sprang up from an intermingling of divine and elemental forces, and so on. And according to many mythologies, most of them will finally meet their ends. They exist in space and time. Each of them is a distinct being rather than being itself, and it is they who are dependent upon the universe for their existence, rather than the reverse. Of such gods there may be an endless diversity, while of God there can be only one. Or, better, God is not merely one, in the way that a finite object might be merely singular or unique, but is oneness as such, the one act of being and unity by which any finite thing exists and by which all things exist together. He is one in the sense that being itself is one, the infinite is one, the source of everything is one. Thus, a plurality of gods could not constitute an alternative to or contradiction of the unity of God. They still would not belong to the same ontological frame of reference as he. Obviously, then, it is God in the former, the transcendent sense, in whom it is ultimately meaningful to believe or not to believe. The possibility of gods or spirits or angels or demons and so on is a subordinate matter, a question not of metaphysics, but only of the taxonomy of nature, terrestrial, celestial, and chthonic. To be an atheist in the best modern sense, however, and so to be a truly intellectually and emotionally fulfilled naturalist in philosophy, one must genuinely succeed in not believing in God, with all the logical consequences such disbelief entails. It is not enough simply to remain indifferent to the whole question of God. Moreover, because thus understood, it is a question ineradicably present in the very mystery of existence, or of knowledge, or of truth, goodness, and beauty. It is also the question that philosophical naturalism is supposed to have answered exhaustively in the negative, without any troubling explanatory lacunae, and therefore the question that any aspiring philosophical naturalist must understand before he or she can be an atheist in any intellectually significant way. And the best way to begin is to get a secure grasp on how radically, both conceptually and logically, belief in God differs from belief in the gods. This ought not to be all that difficult a matter. In Western philosophical tradition, for instance, it is a distinction that goes back at least as far as Xenophanes, circa 570 to circa 475 BC. Yet the most pervasive error one encounters in contemporary arguments about belief in God, especially but not exclusively on the atheist side, is the habit of conceiving of God simply as some very large object or agency within the universe, or perhaps alongside the universe, a being among other beings, who differs from all other beings in magnitude, power, and duration, but not ontologically, and who is related to the world more or less as a craftsman is related to an artifact. At a trivial level, one sees the confusion in some of the more shop-worn witticisms of popular atheism. I believe in neither God nor in the fairies at the bottom of my garden, for instance, or all people are atheists in regard to Zeus, Wotan, and most other gods. I simply disbelieve in one God more. Once, in an age long since vanished in the mists of legend, those might even have been amusing remarks, eliciting sincere rather than merely liturgical laughter, but even so, all they have ever demonstrated is a deplorable ignorance of elementary conceptual categories. If one truly imagines these are all comparable kinds of intellectual conviction, then one is clearly confused about what is at issue. Beliefs regarding fairies are beliefs about a certain kind of object that may or may not exist within the world, and such beliefs have much the same sort of intentional shape and rational content as beliefs regarding one's neighbors over the hill, or whether there are such things as black swans. Beliefs regarding God concern the source and ground and end of all reality, the unity and existence of every particular thing and of the totality of all things, the ground of the possibility of anything at all. Fairies and gods, if they exist, occupy something of the same conceptual space as organic cells, photons, and the force of gravity, and so the sciences might perhaps have something to say about them if a proper medium for investigating them could be found. We can, if nothing else, disabuse ourselves of belief in certain gods by simple empirical methods. We now know, for example, that the sun is not a god named Tonatiuh, or at least not one who must be nourished daily on human blood, lest he cease to shine, because we have withheld his meals for centuries now without calamity. God, by contrast, is the infinite actuality that makes it possible for either photons or, possibly, fairies to exist, and so can be investigated only on the one hand by acts of logical deduction and induction and conjecture, or, on the other, by contemplative or sacramental or spiritual experiences. Belief or disbelief in fairies or gods could never be validated by philosophical arguments made from first principles. The existence or non-existence of Zeus is not a matter that can be intelligibly discussed in the categories of modal logic or metaphysics, any more than the existence of tree frogs could be. If he is there at all, one must go on an expedition to find him, or at least find out his address. The question of God, by contrast, is one that can and must be pursued in terms of the absolute and the contingent, the necessary and the fortuitous, potency and act, possibility and impossibility, being and non-being, transcendence and immanence. Evidence for or against the existence of Thor or King Oberon would consist only in local facts, not universal truths of reason. It would be entirely empirical, episodic, psychological, personal, and hence elusive. Evidence for or against the reality of God, if it is there, saturates every moment of the experience of existence, every employment of reason, every act of consciousness, every encounter with the world around us. Now, manifestly, one should not judge an intellectual movement by its jokes, even if one suspects that there is little more to it than its jokes. But exactly the same confusion shows itself in the arguments that many contemporary atheists make in earnest. For instance, if God made the world, then who made God? Or the famous dilemma drawn in badly garbled form from Plato's Euthyphro. Does God command a thing because it is good, or is it good because God commands it? I address both questions below in my 3rd and 5th chapters respectively, so I shall not do so here. I shall, however, note that not only do these questions not pose deep quandaries for believers, or insuperable difficulties for a coherent concept of God, they are not even relevant to the issue. And until one really understands why this is so, one has not yet begun to talk about God at all. One is talking merely about some very distinguished and influential gentleman or lady named God, or about some discrete object that can be situated within a class of objects called gods, even if it should turn out that there happens to be only one occupant of that class. As it happens, the God with whom most modern popular atheism usually concerns itself is one we might call a demiurge, demiurgos, a Greek term that originally meant a kind of public technician or artisan, but that came to mean a particular kind of divine world-maker or cosmic craftsman. In Plato's Timaeus, the demiurge is a benevolent intermediary between the realm of eternal forms and the realm of mutability. He looks to the ideal universe, the eternal paradigm of the cosmos, and then fashions lower reality in as close a conformity to the higher as the intractable resources of material nature allow. He is, therefore, not the source of the existence of all things, but rather only the intelligent designer and causal agent of the world of space and time, working upon materials that lie outside and below him, under the guidance of divine principles that lie outside and above him. He is an immensely wise and powerful being, but he is also finite and dependent upon a larger reality of which he is only a part. Later Platonism interpreted the demiurge in a variety of ways, and in various schools of Gnosticism in late antiquity he reappeared as an incompetent or malevolent cosmic despot, either ignorant or jealous of the true God beyond this cosmos. But none of that is important here. Suffice it to say that the demiurge is a maker, but not a creator in the theological sense. He is an imposer of order, but not the infinite ocean of being that gives existence to all reality ex nihilo. And he is a God who made the universe back then, at some specific point in time, as a discrete event within the course of cosmic events, rather than the God whose creative act is an eternal gift of being to the whole of space and time, sustaining all things in existence in every moment. It is certainly the demiurge about whom Stenger and Dawkins write. Neither has actually ever written a word about God. And the same is true of all the other new atheists, as far as I can tell.